Welcome, friend. Thank you for joining our special all-night Bible story session. We have got great Bible stories for you, so settle in. If you appreciate what we do here and want to stay connected for more, a simple click on the subscribe button ensures you're always with us. May this night bless you richly. Let's start with the story of Joseph. The wind was still, and the night sky shimmered with 1,000 quiet stars. Joseph lay on his back, staring upward, unable to sleep. The desert air was cool against his skin, but his mind was restless. He had dreamed again. One of those strange, powerful dreams that felt like more than just his imagination. In his dream, he stood in a field with his brothers, all of them binding sheaves of grain. Then suddenly, his sheaf rose upright, while theirs bowed low before it. The image had burned itself into his heart. He didn't know what it meant, but it stirred something deep inside him. A feeling that his life was meant for something greater, something beyond the pastures of Canaan. Joseph was only 17, young and full of light. His laughter was easy, his heart pure, and his faith strong. His father, Jacob, loved him dearly, more than all his other sons. Joseph was the child of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, who had died too young. Every time Jacob looked into Joseph's eyes, he saw her smile, and so he favored the boy with tenderness that everyone else could see. One morning, Jacob called Joseph into the courtyard. The sun lit up the old man's face as he handed his son something wrapped in soft cloth. When Joseph opened it, his breath caught. It was a coat, a long, beautiful coat of many colors, made from fine threads that shimmered like jewels. He slipped it on, and the bright fabric glowed in the morning light. Jacob smiled proudly. "My son," he said softly, "may this coat remind you that you are deeply loved." But not everyone shared that love. Joseph's brothers watched from the shadows, their eyes hard and bitter. Reuben, the eldest, crossed his arms. "Father shows no shame," he muttered. "Does he forget we are his sons too?" Simeon spat into the dust. "Always Joseph," he said darkly. "Always the favorite." The brothers tried to hide their jealousy, but it grew each time they saw Joseph's colorful coat fluttering in the wind. He wore it with pride, not out of arrogance, but innocence. He did not see the hatred building in their hearts. Then came another dream. Joseph, unable to contain his excitement, ran to tell his family. "Listen, I had another dream," he said, smiling wide. "This time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me." His brothers stared in disbelief. Even Jacob frowned. "Shall your mother and I and your brothers come and bow down to you?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Joseph looked confused, realizing too late how his words sounded. But his father quietly kept the dream in his heart, sensing that there might be something divine behind it. From that day, the brothers' anger turned into hatred. They avoided him, mocked him, and whispered behind his back. But Joseph continued to be kind, never understanding why their hearts had turned cold. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were grazing the flocks near Shechem. "Go see if all is well and bring me word," he said. Joseph obeyed without question. He walked for miles under the burning sun, asking strangers for directions, until he finally found them near Dothan. From a distance, they saw him coming. The bright coat made him easy to spot. "Here comes the dreamer," one brother sneered. "Let's kill him and see what becomes of his dreams." Reuben tried to reason with them. "Don't shed blood," he said quietly. "Throw him into that pit instead." He planned to rescue Joseph later when no one was watching. When Joseph reached them, smiling, his brothers surrounded him. "Brothers," he said, breathless and happy. "Father sent me." But before he could finish, they tore the colorful coat from his back. He cried out in shock as they grabbed him and threw him into an empty pit. The walls echoed his voice as he fell. Dust filled his mouth, and pain burned his hands as he tried to climb out. But there was no escape. Above him, his brothers sat down to eat, their laughter echoing cruelly in the still air. Then Judah spotted a caravan in the distance, a group of Ishmaelite traders on their way to Egypt. Their camels carried spices and goods for trade. "What profit is there if we kill our brother?" Judah said. "Let's sell him instead." The others agreed. They pulled Joseph from the pit. His face was streaked with tears and dust. "Please," he begged, "don't do this." But they ignored him and sold him for 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. As the caravan moved on, Joseph looked back one last time. His brothers stood watching until the desert swallowed him up. He didn't know it, but that was the last time he would see Canaan for many years. The brothers returned to their father carrying Joseph's torn coat. They dipped it in goat's blood and handed it to Jacob. "We found this," they said. "Do you know if it's your son's coat?" Jacob trembled as he recognized it. "It is my son's," he whispered. "A wild beast has devoured him." He tore his clothes and wept uncontrollably. No one could comfort him. "I will mourn my son until I join him in the grave," he cried. Meanwhile, Joseph was carried far away to Egypt, a land of towering temples, golden palaces, and strange gods. He was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. Joseph worked hard in Potiphar's house, and soon everything he touched began to prosper. Potiphar saw that this young Hebrew had something special about him, a quiet strength, a peace that never left his face. He trusted Joseph with everything, his home, his land, his business. But Potiphar's wife began to watch Joseph. He was strong, handsome, and kind. The more she looked, the more she desired him. Day after day she tried to tempt him. "Lie with me," she whispered when no one was around. But Joseph refused. "My master trusts me," he said. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" She grew angry. One day, when everyone else was gone, she caught his cloak as he tried to flee. The cloth tore from his hands as he escaped, leaving her furious and humiliated. She screamed, calling the servants. "He tried to attack me," she cried, holding the torn cloak. When Potiphar heard her words, his rage was like fire. He threw Joseph into the royal prison without question. Once again, Joseph found himself behind bars, alone and forgotten. Yet even there, he did not lose faith. He prayed, he worked, and the warden soon noticed that everything Joseph did was done with excellence. He made Joseph responsible for all the prisoners, and even in chains, Joseph became a leader. One night, 2 of Pharaoh's servants were thrown into prison, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. They each had a troubling dream. "Why are you so sad?" Joseph asked. "We had dreams," they said, "and there's no one to interpret them." "Interpretations belong to God," Joseph said gently. "Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer spoke first. "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. It budded and blossomed, and I pressed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and gave it to him." Joseph smiled. "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your place." The baker, encouraged, told his dream. "I had 3 baskets of bread on my head, and birds came and ate from the top basket." Joseph's face grew somber. "In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head," he said softly. Everything happened exactly as Joseph said. But when the cupbearer was restored, he forgot Joseph completely. 2 long years passed. Then Pharaoh himself had 2 strange dreams. In one, 7 fat cows grazed by the river, and 7 thin cows came and devoured them. In the other, 7 full heads of grain were eaten by 7 thin ones. None of his wise men could explain the meaning. Then the cupbearer remembered Joseph. "Pharaoh," he said, "there is a man in prison who can interpret dreams." Pharaoh ordered that Joseph be brought before him. They shaved him, dressed him in clean linen, and led him into the great hall. Pharaoh said, "I hear you can interpret dreams." Joseph bowed deeply. "I cannot," he said, "but God can give Pharaoh the answer he seeks." Pharaoh told his dreams. Joseph listened carefully. Both dreams mean the same thing, he said. There will be 7 years of plenty in all Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Let Pharaoh choose a wise man to gather food during the good years, so Egypt will not perish when famine comes. Pharaoh looked at his officials. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? He turned to Joseph. Since God has revealed this to you, you shall be over my house. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. He placed his ring on Joseph's hand, clothed him in fine linen, and hung a gold chain around his neck. From that day, Joseph ruled Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. For 7 years, the land flourished. Under Joseph's guidance, great storehouses were built, and grain was gathered in abundance. Then the famine came, harsh and relentless. But Egypt was ready. People from all over came to buy food, and Joseph's name became known throughout the world. One day, among the crowds that came to buy grain, Joseph saw a group of weary travelers. His heart stopped. They were his brothers. They bowed low before him, not recognizing the powerful man dressed in Egyptian robes. Joseph's eyes filled with tears, but he hid his identity. "Where do you come from?" he asked coldly. "From Canaan," they replied. "We've come to buy food." Joseph accused them of being spies. They protested, explaining about their family. "We are 12 brothers," they said. "The youngest is with our father, and one is no more." Joseph's chest tightened at those words. He ordered them to bring the youngest brother to prove their honesty, keeping Simeon in prison while the rest went home. He secretly returned their silver and their sacks of grain. Months later, the brothers returned with Benjamin, the youngest. When Joseph saw him, his eyes filled with tears. He turned away and wept in private, then washed his face and returned to them. He invited them to dine at his table, arranging them in their birth order, which amazed them. Yet still, he said nothing of who he was. Before sending them home again, he tested them once more. He ordered his silver cup to be hidden in Benjamin's sack. When they were on their way, his men stopped them. "The governor's cup has been stolen," they shouted. They searched the sacks, and when the cup was found in Benjamin's, the brothers tore their clothes in despair. They returned to Joseph's palace. Judah stepped forward. "Please, my lord," he said, voice shaking, "punish me instead of the boy. Our father will die if we return without him." At that moment, Joseph could hold back no longer. He sent everyone else out of the room. Then he wept so loudly that even Pharaoh's household heard. "I am Joseph," he cried. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers stood frozen, unable to speak. He stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "Don't be afraid. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives." He embraced them one by one. Their cries filled the room. Joseph forgave them completely. What they had done out of jealousy, God had used for destiny. Joseph sent for his father. When Jacob heard the news, his heart nearly stopped. "Joseph, my son is alive," he said in wonder. He gathered his family and journeyed to Egypt. When father and son finally met, they fell into each other's arms and wept for a long time. "I never thought I would see your face again," Jacob said softly. "And now God has let me see your children too." Joseph gave his family land in Goshen, where they prospered. Pharaoh himself welcomed them, honoring Joseph's family because of him. Years passed. Jacob grew old and blessed each of his sons before he died. Joseph buried him in Canaan, as he had promised. After Jacob's death, the brothers grew afraid again. "Now that our father is gone," they said, "Joseph will surely take revenge." They bowed before him once more. "Please forgive us," they pleaded. Joseph looked at them with love. "Do not be afraid," he said. "Am I in God's place? You meant to harm me, but God turned it for good." He comforted them, promising to care for them and their children. And he did. Joseph lived to see his great-grandchildren. Before he died, he said to his people, "God will surely come to you and lead you out of this land to the land he promised to our fathers. When that day comes, carry my bones with you." And when the Israelites finally left Egypt generations later, they carried Joseph's bones, keeping his promise alive. From a pit to a palace, from chains to a crown, Joseph's life was a story of divine purpose. He had been betrayed, enslaved, and forgotten, yet God never left him. Truly, what people mean for evil, God can turn into something beautiful. Now, let's look at the story of Esther. There was a king named Xerxes. He ruled the Persian Empire, the most powerful kingdom on earth. His empire stretched from India in the east to Ethiopia in the west. It covered 127 provinces. When he spoke, millions obeyed. When he commanded, armies marched. When he wanted something, the whole world scrambled to give it to him. Xerxes loved to show off his wealth and power. In the 3rd year of his reign, he threw the most magnificent feast anyone had ever seen. He invited all his nobles, his officials, his military leaders, and the princes of every province. The celebration lasted 180 days, 6 months of continuous feasting, drinking, and displaying the vast riches of his kingdom. The palace gardens blazed with color. White and blue linen curtains hung from silver rings on marble pillars. Guests reclined on couches of gold and silver, placed on a mosaic pavement of expensive stones. Servants poured wine from golden goblets, each one different from all the others. The wine flowed freely, as much as anyone wanted. After those 180 days, the king threw another feast. This one lasted 7 days and included everyone in the citadel of Susa, the capital city. From the greatest to the least, everyone received an invitation. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti held her own feast for the women in the royal palace. On the 7th day of this feast, when King Xerxes was drunk with wine, he made a foolish decision. He commanded his 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before him, wearing her royal crown. He wanted to display her beauty to all the drunk nobles and princes. She was very beautiful, and he wanted everyone to admire what belonged to him. But Queen Vashti refused to come. The messengers returned empty-handed. The king's face turned red with rage. All the nobles stared. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. No one refused the king. No one said no to Xerxes. He was the most powerful man in the world, and his own wife had just humiliated him in front of everyone. The king's anger burned hot. He consulted his wise men, the experts in law and justice. According to the law, what should be done to Queen Vashti for disobeying my command? One of his advisors, a man named Memucan, stood up. "Your Majesty, Queen Vashti has not only wronged you, she has wronged every noble and every citizen in all your provinces. When women everywhere hear what the queen has done, they will despise their husbands. They will say, 'King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to come before him, but she refused.' This very day, the Persian and Median women of nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's officials with the same disrespect. There will be no end of contempt and discord." The advisor continued, "If it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Let the king give her royal position to someone better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout his vast empire, all women will respect their husbands, from the greatest to the least." This advice pleased the king and his nobles. King Xerxes issued the decree immediately. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language. The message was clear: every man should be ruler over his own household. But after the anger cooled, after the wine wore off, King Xerxes remembered Vashti. He remembered her beauty, her presence, the way she made the palace feel alive. His chambers felt empty now. His throne room felt cold. He regretted what he had done, but the laws of the Persians and Medes could never be changed. Once a royal decree went out, it stood forever. The king's personal attendants saw his depression. They came to him with a suggestion. Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins throughout the empire. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province to bring all these beautiful young women to the harem in Susa. Let them be given beauty treatments. Then let the young woman who pleases the king become queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to King Xerxes. He ordered it done immediately. Now in the citadel of Susa lived a Jewish man named Mordecai. He belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. His family had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, along with many other Jews. That had happened generations ago. Now Mordecai lived in Persia, working at the king's gate. He held a minor position in the government, important enough to have an office but not important enough to have real power. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah. She was an orphan. Her mother and father had died when she was young. Mordecai had taken her in and raised her as his own daughter. Everyone called her by her Persian name, Esther. Esther was lovely in form and beautiful in appearance. But her beauty went deeper than her face. She possessed wisdom beyond her years. She watched people carefully, understanding their moods and motivations. She spoke little but listened much. When she did speak, people paid attention because her words carried weight. She treated everyone with kindness, from the richest merchant to the poorest beggar. Mordecai loved her deeply. He had protected her all these years, teaching her the ways of their people in secret. You see, being Jewish in the Persian Empire was dangerous. The Jews lived as exiles, scattered throughout the provinces. They had no homeland, no army, no protection except what they could provide for themselves. Many Persians looked down on them. Some hated them. So Mordecai had warned Esther many times, never reveal your nationality. Never tell anyone you are Jewish. These are dangerous times. Keep your identity hidden. Esther always obeyed Mordecai. She trusted him completely. He had saved her life when she was helpless. Now she would do whatever he asked. When the king's decree went out, searching for beautiful young women to bring to the palace, the king's officers scoured every city and every village. They went door to door, taking any young woman who was beautiful. Families wept. Fathers protested. Mothers clung to their daughters. But it made no difference. This was the king's command. No one could refuse. The officers came to Mordecai's house. They saw Esther and immediately took her. Mordecai stood helpless, his heart breaking. He wanted to fight. He wanted to hide her. He wanted to run away with her to some distant place where the king's reach could not find them. But he knew any resistance would only bring punishment and death. As the soldiers led Esther away, Mordecai gripped her hand one last time. "Remember who you are," he whispered urgently, "but never tell them. Guard your secret with your life." Esther nodded, her eyes full of trust despite her fear. She understood. Her Jewish identity must remain buried deep, hidden like treasure in a field. The king's officers brought Esther to the palace harem in Susa. They placed her under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women. The harem was like a gilded cage. Beautiful young women from every corner of the empire filled the rooms. Persian girls with dark, mysterious eyes. Greek girls with golden hair that caught the light. Ethiopian women with skin like polished ebony. Indian maidens with jewels piercing their noses and ears. All of them were beautiful. All of them were terrified. Most of these girls had been taken from their homes against their will. They had left behind families, friends, dreams of marrying men they loved. Now they faced an uncertain future. One night with the king. That was all they would get. If he liked them, he might call for them again. If he loved them, he might make one of them queen. But most likely they would spend that one night with him and then disappear into the harem forever, forgotten concubines waiting for a summons that would never come. Many of the girls wept constantly. Some refused to eat. Others became bitter and cruel, turning on each other like trapped animals. But Esther remained calm. She comforted the girls who cried. She shared her food with those too depressed to ask for their own. She spoke kindly to everyone, treating the servants with as much respect as she showed the other candidates. In that place of fear and competition, Esther chose compassion. Haggai noticed her immediately. He had supervised hundreds of beautiful women over the years. Most of them blurred together in his memory. Just faces, just bodies, just another group to prepare for the king. But Esther stood out. Something about her captured his attention. Maybe it was her quiet dignity while others wailed. Maybe it was her kindness to the other girls. Maybe it was the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes. Whatever the reason, Haggai favored Esther from the first day. He gave her the best rooms in the harem, the ones with windows overlooking the garden. He assigned her 7 personal maids, the most capable and loyal. He provided her with special food from the king's table. He gave her the finest cosmetics and perfumes. He moved her and her maids to the most desirable place in the house of women. Esther accepted all this with genuine gratitude. She thanked Haggai warmly. She treated her maids like friends rather than servants. She never acted entitled or arrogant. This only made Haggai favor her more. The other girls noticed, of course. Jealousy spread through the harem like poison. Some whispered behind Esther's back. They spread rumors. They tried to turn Haggai against her. But their schemes failed. Esther's genuine kindness could not be counterfeited. Her humility could not be faked. Each day, Mordecai walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem. He desperately wanted news of Esther. He wanted to know if she was safe, if she was well, if she was being treated fairly. The guards recognized him after a while. They let him pace because he never caused trouble. He just walked and worried and prayed to the God of his fathers. Sometimes a servant would slip him a message from Esther. Just a few words to let him know she was alive and unharmed. These brief notes were Mordecai's only comfort. According to the regulations for the women, before a young woman's turn came to go to King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. This was the standard preparation for all the women. The treatments transformed them. Their skin became smooth as silk. Their hair shone like polished bronze. Their bodies became perfect, shaped and sculpted. Every blemish disappeared. Every rough edge softened. They became living works of art, created for one purpose, to please the king. During these 12 months, Esther revealed nothing about her background. When the other girls talked about their families, their homes, their traditions and festivals, Esther spoke in vague terms. She said she was from Susa. She mentioned that Mordecai was her guardian. Beyond that, she offered nothing. She never lied, but she never told the complete truth. Her Jewish identity remained locked away in her heart. Haggai taught her everything she needed to know. How to walk gracefully, how to speak to royalty, what topics pleased the king, what subjects annoyed him. The eunuch's lessons went far beyond simple protocol. He taught her about power, about influence, about the subtle ways a woman could guide a king's decisions without him even realizing it. Esther absorbed everything like dry ground soaking up rain. She learned quickly. She asked smart questions. She understood that her life depended on this knowledge. One wrong move, one foolish word, and she could end up dead or worse. Finally, after 12 long months, Esther's turn came to go to King Xerxes. It was the 7th year of his reign, in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth. The other girls had already gone before her, one by one. Some had returned weeping. Others had returned with forced smiles that fooled no one. None had captured the king's heart enough to be called back. When the time came for Esther to go, Haggai came to her chambers. "You may take anything you want with you," he told her. "Jewelry, fine clothes, exotic perfumes. Whatever you think will please the king. Choose whatever you desire from the royal treasury." Esther looked at the treasures spread before her. Gold necklaces thick as ropes, silver bracelets studded with precious stones, rings with rubies, emeralds, and sapphires, robes of royal purple and scarlet, veils woven from threads so fine they seemed made of mist, enough wealth to buy a small city. Any other girl would have loaded herself with ornaments. They would have tried to outshine all the others who had gone before. More jewelry, more perfume, more of everything. Surely more was better. Surely excess would impress the king. But Esther understood something the others did not. The king had seen hundreds of beautiful women dripping with jewels and perfume. He had grown numb to it, bored by it. What he needed was something different, something real, something genuine. Esther looked at Haggai and said simply, "I will take only what you advise." The eunuch's face broke into a smile. This girl was brilliant. She trusted his judgment, his experience, his deep knowledge of the king's tastes and preferences. Haggai dressed her elegantly but simply. No excessive jewelry, no overpowering perfumes. Just natural beauty, enhanced but not hidden. She looked like a woman, not a jewelry display. That evening, servants led Esther through the palace corridors to the king's chambers. Her heart pounded. Her mouth felt dry. Everything depended on the next few hours. Her future, perhaps her life, certainly her freedom. King Xerxes sat on his couch, a golden wine cup in his hand. He looked tired. He had been dreading another tedious night with another beautiful girl who would try too hard to please him. He expected the usual performance. The practiced smiles, the rehearsed compliments, the obvious, desperate attempts to win his favor. Instead, he found Esther. She entered quietly, without fanfare. She wore simple elegance. She moved with natural grace. When he spoke to her, she listened carefully before responding. She did not interrupt him. She did not finish his sentences. She actually heard what he said. She laughed at his jokes because they genuinely amused her, not because he was king. She asked him thoughtful questions about his empire, his campaigns, his concerns and frustrations. Real questions that showed she cared about his answers. Intelligent questions that revealed a sharp mind. For the first time in years, King Xerxes felt like he was talking to a real person instead of a performer. He felt seen. He felt heard. He felt understood. They talked through the night. The king forgot about wine. He forgot about his advisors waiting in the outer rooms. He forgot about the empire and its endless problems. For a few precious hours, he was just a man talking to a woman who fascinated him. When morning came, the king did not want Esther to leave. When she did leave, following protocol, he could not stop thinking about her. The other women had been beautiful, yes, but beauty faded from memory like morning mist burning off a lake. Esther remained in his mind, vivid and real and present. He summoned her again that night, and the night after, and the night after that. Now Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. People in the palace began to talk about her. The servants loved her. The officials respected her. Even the other women in the harem, despite their jealousy, could not help but admire her. Within a week, King Xerxes made his decision. He loved Esther more than any of the other women. She had won his favor and approval more than any of the virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The king gave a great banquet in Esther's honor. He invited all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces. He distributed gifts with royal generosity. He reduced taxes. He freed prisoners. The whole empire celebrated. They placed the royal crown on Esther's head during the coronation ceremony. The weight surprised her. Gold is heavy. Responsibility is heavier still. Esther became queen of Persia, the most powerful woman in the world. She moved into the royal apartments. Hundreds of servants waited to fulfill her every wish. Her word now carried the force of law across 127 provinces. She could have anything she wanted, go anywhere she pleased, demand whatever her heart desired. But power did not change Esther. She remained the same compassionate woman who had comforted crying girls in the harem. She treated her servants with kindness. She spoke to the lowest maid with the same respect she showed to the highest noble. The crown sat on her head, but humility lived in her heart. And still, she kept her secret. No one knew she was Jewish. No one suspected. Mordecai had told her not to reveal her nationality and family background, and Esther continued to obey him just as she had done when he was bringing her up. Mordecai remained at his post, working at the king's gate. His adopted daughter now wore a crown, but nothing changed between them. She sent him messages secretly through trusted servants. He sent her advice through the same channels. Their bond remained strong, even though they could no longer walk together through the marketplace or share meals like they once did. One day, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, two of the king's officers became angry with King Xerxes. Their names were Bigthana and Teresh. They were eunuchs who guarded the doorway to the king's chambers. For some reason, they felt the king had wronged them. Perhaps he had insulted them. Perhaps he had passed them over for promotion. Perhaps they were simply evil men looking for power. Whatever their motive, they plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. They whispered their plans together, thinking no one was listening. But Mordecai overheard them. He sat at his usual place near the gate, pretending to review his documents. His ears caught every word of their treasonous conspiracy. Mordecai did not hesitate. He immediately sent word to Queen Esther, telling her about the assassination plot. Esther reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. She said, "Mordecai the Jew discovered this plot and told me." The king ordered an investigation. His guards interrogated the two officers. Under questioning, they confessed everything. The plot was real. They had indeed planned to kill the king. King Xerxes ordered them executed immediately. They were impaled on poles as a warning to anyone else who might consider treason. The king then commanded that the entire incident be recorded in the book of the Chronicles in his presence. Scribes wrote down every detail, the names of the traitors, the nature of their plot, and the fact that Mordecai the Jew had saved the king's life. But then the crisis passed. The king moved on to other matters. The empire demanded constant attention. Wars needed planning. Provinces needed governing. The Book of Chronicles was closed and shelved in the royal library. Mordecai received no reward, no promotion, no public recognition, no riches. His name simply gathered dust in the archives, waiting. Mordecai did not complain. He had done his duty. He had saved the king's life and protected Esther. He asked for nothing more. He returned to his work at the gate, faithful and diligent as always. The palace returned to its normal rhythms. Queen Esther settled into her royal duties. King Xerxes dealt with the endless affairs of his vast empire. Life continued, but darkness was coming. Sometime after these events, King Xerxes honored a man named Haman. He was the son of Hammedatha, a descendant of Agag. The king elevated Haman to a position above all the other nobles. He gave Haman a seat of honor higher than all the other officials. Haman became the second most powerful man in the empire, answering only to the king himself. Haman loved his power. He breathed it like air. He fed on it like food. Power was not just something he possessed, it was who he was. He walked through the palace corridors expecting everyone to bow. He spoke and expected instant obedience. He commanded and expected immediate compliance. The king had issued a decree. All the royal officials at the king's gate must kneel down and pay honor to Haman. Everyone obeyed. When Haman approached, officials dropped to their knees. Guards bowed low. Servants prostrated themselves on the ground. Everyone showed him the reverence they would show to a god. Everyone except Mordecai. Day after day, Mordecai came to the king's gate to work. Day after day, Haman passed by. And day after day, Mordecai refused to kneel or pay him honor. He stood straight while everyone around him bowed. He remained upright while others groveled on the ground. The other royal officials at the gate noticed immediately. They asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command? Don't you know you could be executed for this?" Mordecai replied simply, "I am a Jew. We bow to no man. We kneel only before God." Day after day they questioned him. Day after day he refused. Finally they reported him to Haman. They wanted to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated. They were curious whether this Jew would get away with his defiance. When Haman learned that Mordecai refused to kneel or pay him honor, rage consumed him. His face turned red, his hands clenched into fists. How dare this insignificant Jew refuse him? How dare this nobody defy his authority? But Haman was clever. Killing just Mordecai would not satisfy his wounded pride. When he learned that Mordecai was a Jew, a wicked idea formed in his mind. Why kill one Jew when he could destroy them all? Why punish one man when he could annihilate an entire people? Haman began to plot the complete destruction of all the Jews throughout the entire kingdom of Xerxes. Every man, woman, and child, young and old, rich and poor, all of them would die. Their names would be erased from history. Their religion would disappear from the earth. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, Haman cast lots, called Pur, to select a lucky day and month for his plan. The lots fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. That gave him almost a year to organize the genocide. Haman went to King Xerxes with his evil proposal. He spoke carefully, never mentioning the Jews by name at first. He was too clever for that. "Your Majesty," Haman said, bowing low, "there is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their customs are different from those of all other people. They do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury to pay the men who carry out this business." 10,000 talents of silver, an enormous sum, enough to fund armies for years. The king's eyes gleamed at the mention of such wealth. King Xerxes took off his signet ring and gave it to Haman. The signet ring was the symbol of absolute authority. Any decree sealed with that ring became law, unchangeable and eternal. "Keep the money," the king said carelessly. "Do with the people as you please." Haman had won. With those few words, the king had signed the death warrant for an entire nation. On the 13th day of the first month, Haman summoned the king's secretaries. He dictated orders to them in the name of King Xerxes. The secretaries wrote out everything Haman commanded. They addressed the orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. Each order was written in the script of each province and the language of each people. Everything was written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with the king's signet ring. Messengers were dispatched by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, all on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. The orders also stated that all their property would be seized. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality. This way they would be ready for that day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command. The decree was also issued in the citadel of Susa. Then King Xerxes and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was bewildered. How could such evil be commanded? How could such cruelty become law? Confusion and fear spread through the streets like wildfire. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth and ashes. He went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. He went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter there. In every province where the edict reached, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted. They wept. They wailed. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes, the traditional signs of grief and desperation. Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai. The queen was in great distress. She could not understand why Mordecai was mourning. She sent clothes for him to wear instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Something terrible had happened, but she did not yet know what. Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her. She ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything. He explained how Haman had promised to pay silver into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He gave Hathach a copy of the text of the edict that had been published in Susa, so Esther could read it herself. He told Hathach to urge Esther to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported everything Mordecai had said to Queen Esther. The words struck her like a physical blow. Her people. Her people were going to be slaughtered. Every Jewish man, woman, and child in the empire would be killed in 11 months. Esther sent this reply back to Mordecai through Hathach. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law: that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. She was telling him the truth. Persian law was absolute. No one could approach the king without being summoned. Not even the queen. If she went to him uninvited, he could order her execution on the spot. Her only hope would be if he extended his golden scepter toward her, showing mercy. And she had not been called to see the king in 30 days. For all she knew, he had grown tired of her. Perhaps he had found a new favorite. Perhaps her influence was gone. If she went to him now, uninvited, he might simply let her die. Mordecai sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" The words pierced Esther's heart. For such a time as this. All her life had led to this moment. The death of her parents, her adoption by Mordecai, her beauty that caught the king's attention, her wisdom that won his heart, her position as queen. Everything had prepared her for this exact crisis. But the cost might be her life. Esther made her decision. She sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Throughout Susa, Jews gathered to fast and pray. For 3 days and 3 nights, they ate nothing. They drank nothing. They begged God to save them. They pleaded for Esther's protection. They prayed for a miracle. Inside the palace, Esther and her attendants did the same. For 3 days, the queen starved herself. She spent the time in prayer, preparing herself to face death. She made peace with her fate. If God wanted her to die saving her people, she would die. But she would not sit quietly while genocide swept across the empire. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes. She dressed herself as beautifully as she could. Then she walked through the palace corridors toward the inner court, toward the king's hall. Every step might be her last. Every breath might be her final one. But she kept walking. She stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. Their eyes met across the distance. Esther's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. This was it. Life or death. Mercy or execution. Everything depended on the next few seconds. When King Xerxes saw Queen Esther standing in the court, his face softened. She looked so beautiful, so vulnerable, so brave. He was pleased with her. His heart melted. The king extended the gold scepter that was in his hand toward Esther. She was safe. She would live. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The gesture sealed her safety. As long as she touched the scepter, she was under the king's protection. The king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther?" "What is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom." "It will be given you." Half the kingdom. The traditional phrase of generosity. He would give her almost anything she wanted. But Esther did not blurt out her request immediately. She was too clever for that. She needed time to plan. She needed to arrange things perfectly. One wrong word, one tactless approach, and Haman might escape justice. Her people might still die. "If it pleases the king," Esther replied, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." A banquet, just dinner, a small request. The king agreed immediately. "Bring Haman at once," the king commanded his servants, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. Haman felt honored. The queen had invited only him and the king. This proved his importance. His chest swelled with pride. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition?" "It will be given you." "And what is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." But again, Esther held back. The moment was not yet right. "My petition and my request is this," Esther answered. "If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Another delay. Another dinner. The king agreed without hesitation. He enjoyed Esther's company. He did not mind coming back tomorrow. Haman left the palace that day happy and in high spirits. The queen had honored him. The king valued him. Life was perfect. But then he saw Mordecai at the king's gate. That cursed Jew still sat there, still refused to bow, still showed him no respect. Rage boiled up inside Haman. His good mood evaporated like water on hot stone. Yet Haman restrained himself. He went home instead and called together his friends and his wife Zeresh. He boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him. He bragged about how he had been elevated above the other nobles and officials. "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow." His friends murmured their approval. His wife smiled with pride. But then Haman's expression darkened. "But all this gives me no satisfaction," he said bitterly, "as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and all his friends had a solution. "Have a pole set up, reaching a height of 50 cubits, they said. "In the morning, ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." 50 cubits. About 75 feet high. A gallows so tall that everyone in the city would see Mordecai's body hanging there. A monument to Haman's power and vengeance. This suggestion delighted Haman. He had the pole set up immediately. By nightfall, it stood finished, towering over the city like a promise of death. In the morning, Haman would ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai. The king would agree. After all, the king always agreed with Haman. And then that troublesome Jew would finally be dead. Haman went to bed satisfied, dreaming of Mordecai's execution. But that same night, the king could not sleep. He tossed and turned, restless and awake. When sleep refused to come, he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. Perhaps the droning voice of the reader would bore him into slumber. The servant opened the book and began to read. He read about various events, decrees and incidents from the king's reign. Then he came to the account of how Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, the two officers who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. The king sat up suddenly. "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" he asked. His attendants checked the records. "Nothing has been done for him," they reported. Nothing. The man had saved the king's life, and he had received nothing. No reward, no promotion, no recognition. The king felt ashamed. How had he forgotten such an important debt? At that very moment, Haman entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up. Haman had come early, eager to get permission before going to the queen's banquet. The king heard someone in the outer court. "Who is in the court?" he asked. "Haman is standing in the court," his attendants answered. "Bring him in," the king commanded. Haman entered, bowing low. Before he could speak, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman's heart leaped. Who could the king want to honor except Haman himself? Obviously, the king was planning some great reward for him. His mind raced with possibilities. "For the man the king delights to honor," Haman answered, "have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" Haman imagined himself in that royal robe, riding that royal horse, while people shouted his praises. The vision filled him with joy. "Go at once," the king commanded. "Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." The words hit Haman like a physical blow. Mordecai? The king wanted to honor Mordecai, that cursed Jew who refused to bow. Haman felt sick, dizzy, humiliated. But he could not refuse the king's command. With trembling hands and a face drained of color, Haman got the robe and the horse. He found Mordecai at the king's gate, still in his sackcloth and ashes. Haman had to personally dress his enemy in royal robes. He had to lead Mordecai through the streets on horseback while shouting, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." The entire city watched. Everyone saw Haman, the second most powerful man in the empire, serving as herald for the Jew he hated. The humiliation burned like acid in Haman's soul. After the parade, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. He did not gloat. He did not boast. He simply resumed his work, though now people looked at him with new respect. The king had honored him publicly. That meant something. Haman rushed home, covering his face in grief and humiliation. He told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened. His advisors and his wife said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." The words chilled Haman to his bones. For the first time, fear crept into his heart. But before he could respond, the king's eunuchs arrived to hurry him to the banquet Esther had prepared. King Xerxes and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. As they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition?" "It will be given you." "What is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." This time, Esther was ready. The moment had come. She had prepared carefully. She had prayed desperately. Now she would risk everything. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty," Esther replied, "and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request, for I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." The king stared at her in shock. Someone wanted to kill his beloved queen. Someone had plotted genocide against her people. His face turned red with rage. King Xerxes demanded, "Who is he? Where is he? Who has dared to do such a thing? Esther looked directly at Haman. An adversary and enemy, she said. This vile Haman. Haman's face went white. Terror seized him. The king knew. The queen had exposed him. Everything was falling apart. The king was furious. He got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. He needed to think. He needed to control his anger before he did something rash. Haman realized the king had already decided his fate. Terror overwhelmed him. He stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. He fell on the couch where Esther was reclining, pleading desperately for mercy. At that moment, the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall. He saw Haman falling on the couch where Esther was. His rage exploded. Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? The king shouted. As soon as the words left the king's mouth, the servants covered Haman's face. This was the sign of a condemned man. His fate was sealed. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, spoke up. A pole reaching a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king's eyes blazed. Haman had built gallows for the man who saved the king's life? The man the king had just honored. Impale him on it. The king commanded. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. The irony was perfect. The trap Haman had built for another man became his own execution device. The gallows he had erected in pride became the instrument of his destruction. Then the king's fury subsided. Justice had been served. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. She had finally revealed her secret. She was Jewish. Mordecai was her cousin and adopted father. The king now knew everything. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. Esther appointed Mordecai over Haman's estate. The enemy's wealth now belonged to the Jews he had tried to destroy. But one problem remained. Haman was dead, but his evil decree still stood. The law that called for the destruction of all Jews still existed, written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring. And according to Persian law, no decree written in the king's name and sealed with his ring could be revoked. In 11 months, every Jew in the empire would be slaughtered. The law demanded it. Esther went to the king again. She fell at his feet and wept. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman. She pleaded with him to save her people. King Xerxes extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" The king faced a legal dilemma. He could not revoke Haman's decree, but he could issue another decree. King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. No document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked." Immediately, on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, the royal secretaries were summoned. Mordecai dictated all his orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses bred specially for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. They could destroy, kill and annihilate the armed forces of any nationality or province that might attack them, their women and children. They could also plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the same day Haman had chosen for their destruction. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the royal horses, went out, spurred on by the king's command. The edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he wore royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. The city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. Many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. The tables had turned completely. The Jews were no longer helpless victims waiting to be slaughtered. They were now a people protected by the king himself, authorized to defend themselves with lethal force. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned. The Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. All the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His fame spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them. They did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed the 10 sons of Haman, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The king asked Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in the citadel of Susa, including the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted." Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles." The king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The other Jews throughout the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. On the 14th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. Mordecai recorded these events. He sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies. It was the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. The Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. They decided to call these days Purim, from the word pur, meaning lot, because Haman had cast lots to determine the day to destroy them. But his evil plot had backfired completely. Therefore, because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year, in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, and in every province and in every city. These days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, and the memory of these days should never die out among their descendants. Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, with words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire, to its distant shores. All his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes. He was preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. Esther remained queen, beloved by the king and respected throughout the empire. She had saved her people from certain destruction. She had risked her life, and her courage had changed history. The story of Esther reminds us that sometimes we are placed in certain positions for a specific purpose. We may not understand why we face certain trials or why we are given certain opportunities. But everything may be preparation for a moment when we must choose between safety and sacrifice, between silence and speaking up, between protecting ourselves and protecting others. Esther could have remained silent. She could have hidden her Jewish identity and let her people die. She was safe in the palace. The decree would not have touched her. But she chose differently. She chose courage over comfort. She chose her people over her position. She chose to risk everything rather than live with the guilt of doing nothing. "If I perish, she had said. Those words echo across the centuries. They remind us that some things are worth dying for. Some people are worth saving. Some evils must be opposed, regardless of the cost. Esther's story is a story of providence. A Jewish orphan became queen of Persia at exactly the right moment to save her people from genocide. Coincidence? Perhaps. But to those who believe in a God who guides history, it looks like something more. It looks like divine orchestration. The festival of Purim continues to this day, celebrated by Jews around the world. Every year they remember how their ancestors were saved from destruction. Every year they read the story of Esther. Every year they celebrate the triumph of good over evil, of courage over fear, of life over death. And every year they remember that one woman's bravery saved an entire nation. The gallows that Haman built for Mordecai became the instrument of his own death. The decree he wrote to destroy the Jews became the catalyst for their deliverance. The day he chose for their annihilation became the day of their victory. Evil often carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. Pride comes before a fall. Those who dig pits for others often fall into them themselves. This is not just a story. This is a pattern that repeats throughout history. But the story also teaches us about the power of one person who refuses to stay silent. Mordecai refused to bow to evil. Esther refused to let her people die without fighting for them. Together, they changed the course of history. Sometimes we feel powerless. We look at the problems in our world, the injustices, the cruelties, and we think, what can I do? I'm just one person. But Esther was just one person. Mordecai was just one person. Yet their choices mattered. Their courage saved millions. Your choices matter too. Your courage matters too. You may not be a queen, but you are placed where you are for a reason. Perhaps it is for such a time as this. The story of Esther ends with celebration, but it began with fear. It began with a young girl torn from her home. It began with uncertainty and danger. It passed through moments of terror and despair. But it ended with triumph, because people chose to be brave when bravery was required. That is the lesson that echoes across the centuries. That is the truth that the festival of Purim celebrates year after year. That is why the name of Esther will never be forgotten. She was an orphan who became a queen. She was a woman who saved a nation. She was afraid, but she acted anyway. And because she did, her people survived. Their descendants live today, still telling her story, still celebrating her courage, still remembering the days when sorrow turned into joy and mourning into celebration. The gallows stood 50 feet high. They were built for Mordecai, but Haman hanged on them instead. Evil was defeated. Good triumphed. The Jews were saved. And it all happened because one woman said, "If I perish, I perish." May we all have such courage when our moment comes,